Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo, with your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo sports talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you, as always, for checking us out, whether you're watching us on the video side, whether you're listening to this audio podcast form. We appreciate you very much. This is episode 793, Talking Buffalo. I am joined today, as usual, by my man, Anthony Marino. Dude, it's mid-May. I'm cold right now. I'm talking to you in my house where I almost got to put the heat on. I don't know how it is near Albany where you are right now, and I'm, bitching a little bit already right off the bat here about the weather, but I gotta get my mind right. It's cold in here. Like, these headphones are actually keeping my head warm right now. Anyway, how you doing, man? What's going on?
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that. You kind of go through like the different seasons, right? Like, so in the morning I go walk the dog every day. It's like 40 degrees, so you got to be like prepared for that. Then by the time it's, midday, it's around 70, so it's like, all right, well, that's cool. But then you get to the evening, last night we went to dinner and it was like jeans and sweaters and kind of, when I say bundled up, like, the May version of bundled up, not like you would do in the winter. But yeah, I feel like we're almost there though. I'm keeping that mindset.
It is coming. A brutal weekend though, man. It was really cold out. We had a friend of mine smoked some ribs, and we tried to hang out in his yard, a group of us, and it was just raining and just got too cold at some point. But yeah, man, better days are definitely coming. Time you get up for that morning walk with the dog though.
You know what? The kids get up at like 6. So usually I'm up around the same time they are, maybe a little bit after. And, it's kind of once the high schoolers head out a little bit after 7, then I'll walk the dog before getting ready for work. Cause it's just, it kind of ends up being the routine. And then summer will be here and we'll probably both get all kinds of screwed up, but it's all so far, so good. So,
all right. Yeah. So, all right, let me set this up. So in a few minutes, we're going to switch sides. We're going to talk about the other side of the ball. It's so easy to talk offense, and we do it all the time. Of course, you got Josh Allen and, the whole Stephon Diggs drama and the receiver train and what the Bills have done or haven't done on offense that is kind of like dominated the headlines, as it should. But I kind of want to switch gears today because, much to the chagrin of yesterday's guest, Joe from Queens, who called me a homer on the show at least twice, I'm actually starting to get pretty high on this football team. And one thing I definitely like about this football team is the defense. I think this unit has an opportunity to be better than it's been over the last couple of years, which statistically this defense has already been really good over the last couple of years. So we'll kind of spend some time talking about that today. We'll do our finish the sentence segment at the end. In honor of Mother's Day being this past Sunday, 2 to 3 questions are kind of mom related that I have for you in that segment. Before I get going though, I got to tell you, this resonated with me. You sent me a message last week on Twitter, and I don't really talk about it much. And it kind of leads back to like the opening, shtick that I have every episode where I thank people for tuning in, watching or listening or whatever. The numbers on the show, and I don't like to talk about this much, but I'm going to bring it up now. The numbers on the show, and you pointed this out to me, at least on the video side, you sent me a DM last week. The numbers have really risen over the last month or so. It's fun. Anthony, it's kind of like going to the driving range if you're a golfer, and you go to the driving range and you work on your chipping and your putting around the greens and stuff like that. And then it kind of pays off when you're on the course. I kind of feel that's where Talking Buffalo is at right now. Like it was, so I've been doing this podcast for 6.5 years, 793 episodes. So we're getting close to 800. Been doing video for a little over 2 years now, but that was kind of just like a throw in. But lately, I don't know what it was. It was plateaued for a long time, but recently the audience, more so on the video side, but in addition, the audio a little bit as well, has really grown. And I got to thank people like you, of course, for that as well. But just, I don't know, man. I think the consistency, because we've been doing this daily now since early September. Um, I don't know. I guess I'm rambling here. I'm trying to thank people right now because the numbers have like not even just went up steady, like they've increased pretty dramatically.
Well, and I think the thing is, you talk about the consistency, and listen, not sharing anything out of school. I mean, you and I had talked, off air before you
Sure.
decided to go daily, and just saying like, man, that's a big, time commitment for
Yeah.
you, and you want to feel that it's worthwhile for you, and that people are enjoying it and listening, or hey, even if they don't enjoy every segment that you have or every take that you have, and and I think we found too back when I was with Rumblings, like it would be this time of the year as well that consistency, I think, really pays off for people, because there's a lot of shows, both, guys on the beat, content creators, you name it, that, this time of year, they'll, and rightfully so, take some time off from
Right.
doing this. But Bills fans, they really crave that daily conversation, I guess you could say, right? And that's why you see the popularity of the shows on WGR. You see what Joe Marino does, and now for yourself to be doing that daily. But I'm just glad the numbers are looking good for you, because I felt like I was the one that talked you into doing it 5 days a week, and then if it didn't work, you were going to hold it over my head. So
I will say this, I'll reveal this. There were times that we've talked where I was starting to question if it was worth doing it 5 days a week. I've expressed that to you privately, of course. And yeah, you kind of talked me into sticking with it a little bit. Just that consistency. Anyway, I don't want to, spend a whole episode. I'm not trying to brag or anything. It's just it's appreciated, and it kind of motivates you, whether it's a podcast or anything in life, when you feel like you're getting the results for work you put in. If you're going on a diet and you're working really hard and you get stuck for a while and you can't lose any weight, then all of a sudden over the course of a couple of weeks, bam, you lose 10 pounds. You start to feel like it was worth the effort. And that's kind of where I am right now. It really motivates me to I get the weekend where I don't have a show, and by Sunday night I'm actually kind of raring to go. I'm ready to get going with
yeah.
in the new week. Anyway, it's just I really do. I really appreciate everybody who's locking in. Again, whether you're watching it, whether you're listening, it goes noticed. Let's just put it that way. Before we get into the Bills, we tape this. I got to preface this. We usually tape our show Monday morning, as we are doing today. So again, if anything crazy happens with the Bills around the NFL, know that we're talking early in the morning. But there was some early morning news that we could hit on real quick here. It's official now. The Baltimore Ravens are going to open the NFL season on Thursday night, September 5th at Kansas City. So damn, right off the bat, man, you get a rematch of last year's AFC Championship game. Juicy opening, man.
No, it's a good one. And usually, listen, they want that game to be something that's going to be a draw. And I know many will say like, well, hey, whatever, like football is back. You could put the defending Super Bowl champ against anyone and I'm going to tune in. But, from a little bit more of a casual standpoint, keeping those viewers for a longer period of time, obviously, right? Like you get Baltimore, which is a good size market, and of course a great storyline with the rematch of the AFC Championship game. So yeah, when you win the Super Bowl, there is no they do you no favors in week one, to say the least. And
Yeah.
that'll certainly be a fun one.
I got to say this too. And look, this is just the opening game of the season. This isn't a 2024 NFL preview with Patrick and Anthony today, but I got to say this right off the bat. And again, kind of feeding off that being called a homer yesterday and maybe feeling a little bit like one. I'm going to make kind of a Bills homer statement right now. I don't think Baltimore is really that good. I think Baltimore was a beneficiary of just everything that could almost fall right in one season kind of did for the Ravens. I mean, they lost Mark Andrews, but they were relatively healthy. Teams around them seemed to crumble. And it was a great season. I mean, Lamar won an MVP, but he also won an MVP in a season where like nobody just took hold of that award. He kind of won it by attrition, I feel like. Anyway, you get to the AFC Championship game, and I feel like they were kind of exposed for being a little bit fraudulent, being the top seed in the AFC, and I kind of felt like they got dominated at home against Kansas City. I kind of feel like if the Bills would have essentially given away that divisional round game against Kansas City. I think the Bills would have went on to do the same thing. I'm not sold whatsoever on the Ravens. And I know, again, this is just an opening, attractive, juicy game to get the juices flowing, but I'm not a Baltimore guy. I'm really not.
Well, and I'll say this too, and I think as a franchise, at least for where they are right now, I think if you're a Baltimore fan, you probably saying the same thing about the Bills, right? Like, hey,
Sure.
You're really good during the regular season. You can get to this point, but you can't get over the hump. And that will be a case for Josh Allen. That will be a case for Lamar Jackson, certainly, and some of these younger guys that are there. And I know some fans will talk about things and say, well, he's got 2 MVPs, or they went to the AFC Championship game this year. The Bills didn't. I mean, at the end of the day, to me, it does come down to Super Bowls. Like, all of those things are great to have, to be able to look back at and as fans. But, so I do feel there's a little bit of that similarity of just like, hey, you can be great during the regular season, but when it's time for you to step up, you just haven't done it enough yet to get over that hump.
Yeah, for sure. So Wednesday night, the Bills schedule is going to come out, and I don't want to talk much about the schedule right now because our finish the sentence segment, a little bit of a spoiler alert. Well, the last question I got is kind of Bills schedule related, but are you hoping for a pretty big influx of primetime games? I feel like we kind of say this every year, the Sunday 1:00 thing, and it seems too good to have all those games, but like, are you trying to see them play on Christmas? Are you trying to see them play on Thanksgiving? Are you hoping for 4 to 5 primetime games this year? And we'll find out for sure in like a little less, I should say, than 48 hours.
Yeah, let me say this. I like the primetime games. I'll just start with that, right? And I say that because I'm not a season ticket holder, so I don't have that issue that some folks do that are a little bit more vocal about it. And I get that part, right? Because hey, for them, if they're traveling a little bit, that 1:00 on Sunday, like, you can drive in, you can drive out, you can do, whatever you need, and you can kind of plan around that. Just for me personally, the primetime games, it's like, listen, I can get home, any travel I'm doing for work or just stuff for the kids or whatever it is. Like, if a game starts at 8:30, usually, whatever I have going on is done at that point.
Right.
And I can focus on the game, and I don't have to, worry about anything sort of interfering or feel that I'm being a bad parent or family member or friend or anything. If it's just like, hey, the Bills play at 1:00 on Sunday, like, I'm not coming to your cookout type of thing. Or, so with that, I like it. I do not love the idea of the Christmas Day games. And I say it this year really only because whatever they're doing with it being on a Wednesday, I feel like is a mistake. That part to me is different than liking the primetime games. I've liked the Thanksgiving games that they've played in. I think Thanksgiving is a holiday, at least in my family, both on my wife's side, on my side of the family. Like, Thanksgiving is about football as much as it is the food, right? Like, you're watching the game. So, hey, when the Bills played the Lions, like, we were eating at the end of that game. When the Bills played the Cowboys, like, we're eating before that game. And when they played the night game in New Orleans, it was just like, hey, I can feel kind of chubby and put my sweatpants on and just everybody's falling asleep and I can just enjoy the game. So that was a really long answer to your question, but that's my take.
I said it yesterday. I'll say it again. I'm superstitious. I'm very superstitious. I don't want anything to do with Thanksgiving. I don't want one of our players to tear their ACL. It's happened the last 2 times. And I am ridiculously superstitious. Anyway, all right.
Can I ask you one quick question though on this one that I am in favor of and I didn't mention? Like, I would love the Black Friday game. Like, I am not a shopper. It is a nothing day. Like, you want to give me Bills, anybody on Black Friday, like, it doesn't mess with the holiday, right? Like, I'm not rearranging when dinner comes out or any of that type of stuff and adding it's tough enough to plan everything to come out at the right time for Thanksgiving dinner to begin with, let alone predicting when a game is going to start or end or any of those pieces. But I like the Black Friday deal.
Yeah, I do too. And that's, I'd rather do that than play on Thanksgiving. I obviously would rather do that than play on Christmas Day. And some people are like, Black Friday. Yeah, there's going to be a Black Friday game this year. In fact, there's going to be, we now know that Baltimore is opening the season at KC on Thursday night, September 5th. The next night, we also know that Philly is playing Green Bay in Brazil. That's a Peacock game, too, on Friday. So there's going to be 2 games, actually, in the NFL this year on Friday. All right, in terms of this Bills defense right now, again, it's just so easy to focus on the offense because that's kind of feels like where all the juicy stories are. And it almost feels like when you look at the 2023 defense, at least to me, maybe not to others, but a little bit under the radar. This is a defense that was 4th best in the NFL last year in points and 9th best in yards against, which is actually a little bit of a decrease. If you go back to over the last couple of years, 2022, the Bills were 2nd in points and 6th in yards. And then in 2021, they had the best defense in the NFL. They were 1st in points and 1st in yards. So statistically, Anthony, everything seems hunky-dory, but there were some issues for sure with last year's defense. Kind of want to talk about a few of those, and then I want to get into why I actually think this defense this season could and maybe even should be improved. Last year, the Bills they lost 7 games, and in 6 of those 7 losses, they gave up at least 24 points. Kind of felt like it was like all or nothing at times with this defense. Like they either would dominate or they just didn't play good. But the things that I wanted to talk with you about that directly affected their record was, I think the biggest issue last year with the Bills defense is they played well for stretches, but they didn't close out games. Like they had late leads 3 times. They lost 3 games where they had a lead late where the Bills scored a touchdown, I think when inside the last 2 minutes or so. New England, Denver, at Philly. That's 3 times where they had a late lead and the defense couldn't hold them and they lost. And then they quite frankly got lucky against Kansas City because Kansas City should have scored a touchdown that would have gave them a last-minute lead, but Kadarius Toney lined up offsides. Kind of talk about that with the defense last year. Really good at times, but kind of melted a little bit down the stretch.
Yeah, and I mean, gosh, you bring up, I've tried not to think of that New England game and that Denver game too much in the time since they happened. And, and I do remember that game, and this sounds like maybe I'm making an excuse for the defense, but like the offense also did them no favors in those two games, right? Where it's just like, gosh, you're playing 2 of the worst teams in football, and you really just are not getting anything going on the offensive side. Like, and the defense is a little bit of what do we use that term? Bend but don't break. But it's so I try not to like look back, because then there could be an example on the other side too, right? But gosh, you brought up those 2 games and I just sort of winced a bit. But yeah, this is a really interesting discussion, because I think, again, you can look at the numbers and say like, hey, on paper, this is where they ranked each of these years. And then I think as fans, there's that part of us that feels, well, one, a little bit too much like, yeah, but there's been a few too many of those letdowns in some big spots. And again, I'm not even getting to playoff games. I'm even just talking regular season type of stuff. And the examples you brought up were perfect fits. And on the other side too, you can look at things, and I know we'll talk a little bit about injuries and things as well. Like, hey, despite all of that stuff, or despite starting guys like Josh Norman or Levi Wallace or, Dane Jackson as a 7th round draft pick, it's like you've still been able to play at a really high level despite the injuries and despite having to play late round guys. So I'm really conflicted with today's conversation. I'm just going to be honest with you.
Sure, I am too. And you brought up injuries. Look, every team has injuries. I get that. So I do think injury luck for the Bills was terrible last year. Losing Matt Milano, who I think is the best player on the defense, was a huge blow. And losing DaQuan Jones for a big chunk of the season was a huge blow. And I might even be able to say, though, but you know what? Teams just get banged up. So you kind of have to deal with that. It happened early enough in the season that the Bills had a lot of time to adjust. And they did. I think they did. I think Tyrell Dodson came in. He sure as hell ain't no Matt Milano, but I think he gave the Bills a lot more than I expected with Milano out. But when I say injury luck, like also at the worst times, I can't, again, the continuation of the Patrick Moran transformation into a Buffalo Bills homer is in full effect right now, because I look back to the end of the season and into the playoffs. And I refuse to believe that if Taylor Rapp, Terrell Bernard, Christian Benford, all three key components to a late Bills season defense, none of them played in that Kansas City game. They were all out. And Rasul Douglas was a shell of himself because he tried to play with an injured knee. I think that, again, this defense, especially in the first maybe 60% of the season, got too loose at the end of games. But I feel like overall they're good. And especially near the end of the year. Because, I mean, this is a team, they lose to the Chargers if the defense doesn't dominate. They did not play well offensively in the season finale, which everything was at stake there. The defense and then ultimately a punt return carried that team to a victory. But you get to the playoffs, dude, that's too many injuries to overcome. And you got A.J. Klein out there, for Christ's sake, on Travis Kelce. But I just think they had terrible injury luck. And I do think that was a factor with some of what went wrong with the defense.
No, and I think that's a great point too. And again, to you, like you said, everyone will be like, "Oh, well, every team has injuries." Like, yes, they do, but there's also just the piece of like, sometimes you lose a guy for 4 weeks and not for the rest of the season, or again, the timing when it comes about. And it is interesting, as you mentioned, that with the game against Kansas City, because honestly, I hadn't been thinking about Christian Benford's injury. I hadn't been thinking about Rasul Douglas basically being out there on one leg, and like, you're trying to make it work and make it happen. And yes, the Bills were a missed field goal away from tying that game. So it's interesting because when you look at all that stuff and people, there's always going to be conversations around Sean McDermott and, should he have stayed as the defensive coordinator, and who should call plays this year, and should he be on the hot seat? Like, you even see that, and it's just like, but again, you talk about all of those injuries that you have to overcome, and you're still, when I say on the doorstep, I'll just say on the doorstep of beating the Chiefs in that game. Like, it's probably not as bad as some want to make it out to be. Not everyone's a homer, you know what I mean? And I know you keep using that.
I use it as a kind of a joke because this is a good football team,
Right. But it is reality at a certain point. Like when you add all of those up, like, yeah, it's going to have an impact. And it did.
Let me just real quick, again, jokingly being a homer, let's not lose sight of the fact that despite the fact that there are a lot of people, especially around the league, that think the sky's falling with the Buffalo Bills because they look at who they lost. You traded Stephon Diggs, your number one receiver. You lose Gabe Davis. You lose Mitch Morse. You lose Trey White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, yada, yada, yada. Keep going. This is still a team that is, I think they're tied for having the 5th best Super Bowl odds right now. So I think they're tied with like 3 other teams too. But they're in the top 25% of the NFL in terms of betting favorites right now to get to the Super Bowl. So it's not like this is some like dark horse, Cinderella story version of a football team. Just a quick sidebar because you brought up something. I meant to ask you this before. Bobby Babich is defensive coordinator. We know that Sean McDermott was asked who was going to call plays, and Sean said, "We'll see. We'll find out at training camp." What's your preference? Like, would you like to see Sean McDermott continue to call the plays, or would you like to see that get handed off to Bobby Babich if it was up to you?
Let me say this. I have very little issue with the job that Sean McDermott did last season. But I think Bobby Babich should be calling the plays, right? I think if you are going to be the head coach, you are the CEO of everything that is taking place. And if you've got someone in that position that can do that work for you, if you're going to have that evolution, if you're going to give Babich that opportunity to grow, I think that is what to do. And listen, we've seen McDermott before. If something is not going right in the past, even with Leslie Frazier, be like, hey, I'm going to call the plays in the second half of this game to try and give things a different look or whatever it is. Like, I'm not saying you want to see that either, but it's just like, listen, he can still have that influence as needed. But I think from everything that I've heard about Bobby Babich, and Micah Hyde was on with Eric Wood. I think that podcast just came out. I was listening to it this morning as well. And when you heard the enthusiasm in Micah Hyde's voice and talking about Bobby Babich and the coach that he is and the preparation that he goes through and getting the guys in a position to be successful, to me, it was just like, yeah, there's no doubt this guy is ready. And that would certainly be my preference.
Got to ask you because you just brought it up. Did Micah Hyde, who Eric Woods said it on Buffalo podcast, which by the way, I love that show, man. I think Eric is first of all, he's a great guy, and he's a good host. And I kind of respect, some people want to be critical or like, we're saying, well, it's hard for him to be objective. He's friends with all the players and the team and stuff like that. He's not going to be overly critical towards anybody. I'm like, good. There's enough of those out there already. I'll be overly critical towards somebody. Lots of people will. I don't need every show to be, this critical look at the Buffalo Bills where you're going to get angry on the air and just start ranting like myself or Nate Gary or somebody like that, when shit's not going good for the Bills. But anyway, I enjoy that show. And plus he is, I mean, he's getting everybody on his show. He's got all the Jordan Boyer was just on. She had Sean McDermott. Brandon Beane's been on his show. So obviously of course he's connected to the pipeline of the team. But anyway, my point was just nice, light, fun conversations he's had with guests. Was there any indication from Micah about if he's done playing or not, or is it still one of those kind of up in the air things?
No, I would suggest everybody give it a listen. Micah is he was very open, and I would say the door is still open to him continuing to play football. It was something where as he talked about it, it was just like he has not made a decision yet. And he is he's spending some time with his family right now. He's, kind of talked about, where his mindset is. He's got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old at home, and he's enjoying that at this time. And even Eric was saying to him, like, hey, some of these guys would just be like, well, I'm not going to do OTAs and maybe, miss the beginning of training camp and then come in. But it is something that Mike is definitely considering. They talked about, the stingers in his neck and the surgeries that he had before. So without sharing too much, I mean, listen, Eric's podcast is always a must listen, but this episode, I felt like Micah Hyde was very, very open, and there was no like hesitation in his voice. Sometimes it could just be like, you can be saying the right things, but your body language and your tone might be saying something different. I believe the door is open.
My heart,
but he hasn't made a decision. Like it's not he hasn't really decided one way or another.
I feel like my heart says it'd be a cool story if he came back to the Bills. I mean, it's been reported that if he were to come back, he'd like to play for the Bills. I don't think Mike Edwards, if Micah Hyde were to come back, I don't think Mike Edwards starting at free safety would be written in Sharpie. So we'd see how that played out. My mind says he's probably going to chill for the summer and kind of like Linval Joseph, some of those guys did last year. If an opportunity, an injury comes along and he could jump into it, maybe a contender at some point during the season, maybe that's how it would play out with him. And I'd be all for it, man. I love Mike Hyde, one of my favorite Bills players of all time. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off the path here. Here's what I want to do. Take a quick break. We talked about the 2023 defense, being statistically really good, but some issues. Part of it because of injury. Take a quick break. Come back on the other side. I want to talk about why I think this year's Bills defense might even be better than last year's. So be right back. Back with Anthony Marino. We are talking 2024 Buffalo Bills defense, other side of the ball today. Why I think, and maybe Anthony does as well, we'll find out here in just a few, that they may actually be better this year than last year, despite losing a couple of bigger names, primarily at safety. We just talked about Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer gone as well, Leonard Floyd, a big loss for them. But in terms of getting into some reasons why I think they might even be better, I got 4. And I want to talk about 2 players specifically because I think they're very important to this team. Let's start actually with Von Miller. And I know some people are going to roll their eyes, but Sean McDermott did say during one of his interviews that was real close to the draft that, or maybe it was Brandon Beane, actually. It wasn't Sean, it was Brandon, that said Von Miller's 100% healthy. Obviously, that matters a lot. They did lose Leonard Floyd, 10.5 sacks, one hell of a free agent signing last year. Leonard Floyd gives him a great year. Then he leaves a free agency, and the Bills are probably going to end up getting a 5th-round comp pick for that one season of Leonard Floyd. But anyway, my point is this, Anthony. We all saw, we have functioning eyes, most of us do anyway, and Von Miller just, he didn't have anything last year, nothing. But I thought in the playoffs, he kind of turned the corner, and I especially think in that Kansas City game, I remember saying it at the time. I kind of still feel the same way. I thought he was the best defensive lineman on the team, which wasn't saying much because the defense really didn't do anything against the Chiefs to stop them. But Vaughn had some flashes. He had some moments. And 35 years old or not, he's healthy. At least now he's healthy. I think he has a really good chance to be productive. I don't think he's going to play 65, 70% of the snaps. Maybe he'll be a little more of a pass rush specialist going forward. But I think Von Miller healthy, even at his age, is a really good sign for the Bills. And again, considering he did nothing last year, I have no reason to think why he can't come in and kind of give them what they lose with Leonard Floyd right now. What I'm basically telling you is I think I'm higher on Von Miller than a lot of other people right now.
Yeah, I think you are, but I think along those same lines, like that is just, and there's so many storylines with the defense, and I know we'll talk about some others as well, but like, yeah, like the kind of the ultimate wild card for the Bills defense this year. Like, unless they do something else at defensive end, similar to what they did in signing Floyd in, around June last year, that barring something like that happens, like, yes, they are banking on Von Miller being a better version of what he was in 2023, right? And I say that meaning, maybe he's never going to be the guy that deserves $20 million a year based on his age and what the production can be. But I think I've said before, like, can he be a 7 to 10 sack guy? And as you mentioned, a pass rush specialist. Yeah, I can see that happening, and they certainly need him to be.
Yeah. Our good friend, Joe Marino from Locked On Bills, has a 2-part series coming up soon. He does it every year. It's going to be coming out soon, and we both partook in this series with him this year. He has a list of the top 10 Buffalo Bills that are most important to the future of the team. Okay, I want to make sure I emphasize the word future of the team. I don't think Von Miller is really important to the future of the team because this is very likely going to be in his last season here in Buffalo. So, and by the way, check that series out. It's going to be really good. He's got a great panel. But if I were to tell you, I got a list of a top 10 players that are critical to the Buffalo Bills for 2024 and 2024 only, I think Von Miller might be on my top 3. That's how important I think he's going to. Yeah, I mean, look, Greg Rousseau's never had more than 8 sacks. A.J. Epenesa's never had more than 6.5 sacks in a season. Dwayne Smoot is coming off an Achilles. I feel like for the Bills defense to be what it can be, they need Von Miller to be maybe what he was when he signed with the Bills before he tore his ACL, where he had I think maybe 7.5 sacks in 9 games or something like that. I think they need that production to be close to it. I think they need it. You got to have somebody who can get that quarterback down. And he, to me, is by far the best player on this team at doing that.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic on some of the other pieces and what they can do, most notably, for what A.J. Epinesa has done in limited snap counts and, Gregory Rousseau. I mean, again, you talk about injuries. It's like the guy gets off to a good start each year. Then he ends up with something that, takes him out for a little bit and he comes back and he's just not 100%. And, again, you respect that for being out there and trying to do what you can. So, yeah, I mean, just for, I kind of had a visceral reaction when you said top 3, but I get what you're saying. Like, yeah, if he can come out and, be a double-digit sack guy, then yeah, he probably will be one of the 3 most important Bills in 2024. I'm just not, if I was putting together a list for next year, I'd probably have Ed Oliver ahead of him, I know you wouldn't, unless Ed Oliver's number 2 on your list. Yeah, anyway, you get what I'm saying.
I do, and maybe as I ponder that thought, maybe it came out of my mouth a little too quick. Maybe it would be 3, but I think maybe I just inadvertently came up with an exercise for one of our future shows where we kind of have to rank players of importance for this year and this year only. Another guy, and again, a big reason why I think this defense could and should be better this year is Matt Milano. I think, first of all, he's the best player on this defense. I don't even really think there's any debate. I think he's the best player on the defense last year, probably the year before as well. I don't think you can understate his value on defense. I don't think you can understate how good he is and how much better of a matchup defense this is when you have Matt Milano out there instead of Terrell Dodson. And again, nothing against Dodson. I complimented him earlier in this show. And I also think about him playing with a really good linebacker next to him now in Terrell Bernard. And I guess I'm a little bit, I don't want to jump the gun too much because until I hear that Matt Milano is 100%, which we have not heard that yet, I'm still going to have some worry. But let's just assume it being May, we get to training camp, which is still more than 2 months away, and you're going to get 100% Matt Milano out there. This is just it's a defense that's just, man, it's just so much better. To me, this would be like an offense getting their number one receiver back. It'd be like the Raiders with or without Devontae Adams. You know what I'm saying? It's just, I think he's that important to this defense.
Yeah, and I'm going to be optimistic with Milano and his health because I felt like with the moves that the Bills made this offseason, like there was nothing that screamed to me like, oh, hey, this is a move that's taking place just in case Milano is not ready. I mean, some depth signings, again, you take a linebacker in the 5th round, like none of that screams to me, hey, we're not sure if he'll be ready for training camp. So at least, in trying to stay optimistic, I'll stay there. And, and it's hard for me to say like he's the best or the most important on the defense, because I think when you look at all of it too, right, there's so many guys that are good. Like there are so many good players. I do think with Milano, just the pieces, it's just like, yeah, his play, whether it's against the run, against the pass, he is having an impact on 100% of the snaps where, in some other ways, like, and I get, you can say, yeah, everyone is, but if it's a quick pass and you're a one tech defensive tackle, like you might not have as much impact as Matt Milano's running around with his hair on fire, making plays here and there. So I'm optimistic, but again, it's like, hey, what does that recovery look like? Like when he gets back on the field, are there any mental pieces that tie into that too? Like that will be probably an under the radar type of story. Cause again, everyone will be talking about Von Miller and new safeties and, rookies coming in and this type of stuff. And I think this will be one that will probably be the most important story when you think about like the defense and coming back.
Sure. He's literally an all-pro. I mean, he's literally an all-pro player. And you saw it in the first month of the season. He was just, he was off to another spectacular start. But anyway, so Vaughn getting back or being 100% gives them a lift. Matt Milano being back in his lineup, I think is going to give them a huge lift. Another thing too is 2 other things I had. Just a youth, an influx of youth and athleticism on this side of the football. Look, I think one of the issues with the defense last year, in all honesty, is at times in certain situations, they looked old and slow. I mean, let's just call it what it is. We just talked about Micah Hyde. Man, I love me some Micah Hyde. But that was not the Micah Hyde last year that we've seen the previous, 3 or 4 years. Jordan Poyer, a warrior, just they've lost some of that foot speed. It's just, that's what it is. You look at, the defensive line, and Laval Joseph comes off the couch middle of the season. He's old, he's slow. Jordan Phillips banged up all the time. End of his career. Yeah, I don't even know. Actually, he did sign with the Giants, so I don't think his career is over now. But anyway, just old and slow. And this defense just looked like Terrell Dodson, not a great athlete. Good football player, hard-nosed guy, not a great athlete. AJ Klein, no comment necessary. Having to come in, I respect the guy and what he did. Was on vacation with his family, had to answer the call. I get all that. But my point is, a lot of age and not the greatest, amount of athleticism. And I think that was a very concerted effort by the Bills this year to get younger and more athletic. They draft Cole Bishop in the 2nd round. I think we all knew the Bills were going to take a safety, but after Rapp re-signing and signing Mike Edwards, I'm not sure that we thought it would come in the first 2 rounds, but they really like Cole Bishop. He's a really good athlete. Mike Edwards is a pretty good athlete, not an elite athlete, but he's faster than Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer at this point. Dwayne Carter, an athletic defensive tackle for his size. They got out of Duke. Javon Solomon, kind of like almost like Von Miller type of looking athlete, bendy, agility, kind of almost freakish. I can't pronounce the dude's name yet, so I'm going to continue to say the linebacker from Washington that they got in the 5th round, a really, really good athlete. So my point is I think they're making a concerted effort to get younger and more athletic, because I think at times last year they're a little bit old and slow. So I think that's the reason why I could see this defense improving right away as well.
Yeah. So I think with everything that you talk about and where I said earlier, like I'm struggling with this conversation a little bit, like all of the moves individually, totally get, right? When you talk about age creeping up on some guys in the back 9 of their career, I get all of that. I think it's the part where like it all happens at once, right? So you're like, man, Trey White and Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer and Terrell Dodson, like, okay, good. And really even just those first 3, as you talk through it, where you're thinking to yourself, I mean, these guys that have been great performers, they've been all pros, they've been leaders. So it's like, if it was staggered, like if a year ago you replaced Jordan Poyer and then this year you replaced Micah Hyde, and then, like a little bit, like you get to that same point. This is a little bit more like ripping the Band-Aid off and just like, hey, yeah, this team is getting younger and it is happening immediately. So that's the part that's going to be really interesting with this. As I said before, we've seen this team, guys go down with injury. Hey, DeMar Hamlin has to start 15 games. You don't lose too much of a step. We've seen, like we said, we talked about Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson and all these guys coming in. I mean, heck, even Jamarcus Ingram having to come in spots. Guys elevated from the practice squad and doing a good job playing on the defensive side of the ball. Now it's like, hey, you're making all of these types of changes. It is a new look defense. And I don't say it in a bad way, in a pessimistic way. It's just, it's going to be interesting to see how these guys perform.
Yeah. Last one. And to me, this is one of the more under the radar issues with the Bills last year that I had a big problem with. And man, oh man, we continue to talk about wide receiver. To this day, we still continue to talk about wide receiver. But to me, maybe the biggest problem with this football team last year, above anything else, even when Ken Dorsey was offensive coordinator and just the offense just seemed completely out of sync at times, maybe even more so than the couple of really stinkers that Josh Allen had, where you could say he's the reason why they lost the game. To me, the single most consistent, biggest issue with the team last year was the lack of defensive tackle depth. And I know that sounds silly, and for a lot of teams, that would be silly. But on a Sean McDermott coach football team, your 3rd, your 4th defensive tackles are going to play 35 to 49% of the snaps. They play a lot. It's a rotation. It's a true, legitimate rotation. So last year, you have Ed Oliver, who I ride on a lot. He is a good football player.
You do?
He's a good football player. He just turns into mush in the playoffs. I'm sorry. I'll never call you a great football player when you are a no-show in a playoff 2 straight years. So he's a good player. He's not a great player until proven otherwise. Anyway, you have him, okay? You had DaQuan Jones, 31 years old. Now he's 32. He's really good. And I thought he was playing at an all-pro level last year, the first month of the season, before he tore the pec and got hurt. But from week 1 to week 19, whatever, 20, when one of those guys weren't on the field, the drop-off at defensive tackle was horrific at times to watch. And as somebody not on the level of Anthony Prohaska and Eric Turner and some of these, film guys, I'm not on Joe Marino, I'm not on that level, but I pay attention, I watch the film. And the defensive tackle position last year was garbage. It was garbage. Jordan Phillips, nothing. Tim Settle was mostly awful. Poona Ford, I thought was going to be a really good summer signing. Nothing. Linval Joseph, again, came off the couch, didn't even have a camp. Maybe we shouldn't have expected too much. Nothing. There was nothing at defensive tackle behind the starters. I think that is a big, big problem for the Bills, or it was last year. This year, Austin Johnson, no world beater, but I clearly think he's better than Phillips or Settle. Dwayne Williams, not a terrible player either. And then they used a 3rd-round pick, a day 2 pick. That in part, they really wanted that day 2 pick. They traded down in part from 28 because they wanted to get that pick. And they used it on a defensive tackle. We all thought maybe they double dip a receiver or go somewhere else. They took a defensive tackle. That tells me they know that position was awful last year, and they liked Dwayne Carter a lot. But anyway, my point, long-winded point here is I thought defensive tackle depth was garbage last year, and I think it's going to be much, much better this year.
No, and listen, there was certainly an underperformance. And I think, look, most of us were excited when the Bills signed Tim Settle. We thought that, young player ascending a bit, things didn't work out. That's fine. You can even understand, like, hey, giving him that second year and not moving on. But we've talked about it in the past. Defensive tackle is so much more of an important position in the NFL now than it ever has before. And you can see this with the contracts that these free agents are getting to re-sign with their teams. They are getting huge money. It has become almost more of a premium than defensive end, based on how the game has evolved and getting that pressure up the middle. The Bills making more of an investment, again, through the draft and free agency. I hope that's an area where you see some improvement because, and it's not exciting to talk about interior defensive line when you're thinking about moves that you want to make in free agency. Like, you talk about wide receivers and skill positions and things that are a little bit more flashy, but they did some work there this year. And that will be, again, kind of one of those other storylines that we'll look at and see those guys that playing 30 to 49% of the snaps, what they can do.
I can't understand how bad that play was last year when Ed Oliver and DaQuan Jones, when one of those guys weren't off the field. I mean, good God, you talk about night and day. Just time and time again, watching guys get blown off the line. It was just, I thought the defensive tackle depth last year, good names. And look, I liked Tim Settle too, by the way. I was excited when they signed him. Kept hearing about, and it was true. He was stuck behind two really good tackles in Washington, and it was about opportunity. He had opportunity here, and he never did anything with it. Defensive tackle depth stunk last year. So anyway, you had that up. Von Miller, Matt Milano, healthy, back, an influx of some youth and athleticism, some improved defensive tackle depth, and I think you have the makers again. You got to have better injury luck too, because that has been the biggest thing, these critical injuries. And I think you have the makings of a team. We can sit there and talk about what kind of offense they're going to be. I did that yesterday on the show about Joe Brady. But I feel like this is a team, and people might not want to hear this too much because you got a elite quarterback. This could be a team that's powered by their defense. I truly think potentially they could be that good. By the way, I didn't even mention Teron Johnson, who might be one of the top two slot corners in the entire NFL. You know what I mean? Ed Oliver, a good player. DaQuan Jones, still a good player. Greg Rizzo, a good player. This is a good unit. I'm higher on the Bills defense right now than I am the offense.
No, again, I'm not going to go that far, but I think when you look at it, there's a reason that you can be optimistic, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be optimistic and looking at the defense, you can right now. And I think there's enough reasons with that, because you talk about some of these young guys, and Terrell Bernard, who, again, I think is the one when you talk about, a player with the arrow pointing up. I would guess he will be a captain on the team this year, someone that they will extend soon enough, after the completion of his third season. And that guy kind of being the next, when I say Matt Milano, I mean like that guy that will get multiple contract extensions to stay in Buffalo, because he has that Sean McDermott DNA that people like to talk about.
It's funny. I just ran off these defensive guys and I literally forgot about, I continue to forget about Terrell Bernard, who's absolutely, he's ascending as a player. Now you sold me even more on this unit. Let me ask you a quick question. And I don't want to dive into this now. I want to get to finish the sentence before we get out of here, but this could also be a future conversation. We spent a lot of time talking about the defense today. We've talked offense before, the offense, if you had to point to something right now that would be, as we sit here in May, and they probably ain't going to do anything significant between now and training camp. You never know, but that's not the expectation. But what about this team? You don't have to be a specific player, but is there something about this team right now where you would consider the biggest red flag, or something that right now you're most worried about? Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn out to be bad, but like, what's your biggest worry with this football team right now? Because I feel like I just laid out a defense that could be a top 5 defense, and you got Josh Allen. Like, what's wrong with this team? Like, what's your biggest concern right now?
Just on defense or the whole team?
Just the whole team. It could be anywhere.
I will say the shift from Connor McGovern to center and David Edwards coming in as a starting guard.
I agree.
And listen, there's other things I could point to, like, but to me, that's just the one, like, that is a risk that you decided to take. And, again, hey, Mitch Morris, like, you want to move on, you'd rather move on a year too soon than a year too late type of thing. And I get that part. But to me, that is just something like, okay, that's a calculated move, like two guys with, successful NFL careers so far, but you make that shift.
Yeah.
That better work.
I completely would agree with you. And again, we'll kind of get into some of these topics. We got time. I mean, can't those start for 2 months. But yeah, last year, if something went wrong with Mitch Morris, you got Ryan Bates there. Or you could slide Connor McGovern over. You had options. Right now, it's Connor McGovern or a rookie and a 5th-round rookie. And I don't know how I feel about that. So I would agree. Did I forget anything on defense? I feel like I covered something. Is there anything that you think I forgot about?
No, I think we got it all. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of moving parts with it, but like you said, it's I agree with your point on defensive tackle. Like the overhaul there taking place with the depth, that will be something that can really pay dividends and hopefully made the right move.
Sure. I'll say one more thing that kind of sticks with the defense. I asked you for what your biggest concern and red flag is, and you said Connor McGovern, and that's a point that I'll agree with. I think my runner-up would be that signing Dwayne Smoot in his contract, that tells me Chase Claypool is going to get a look at camp, and maybe he'll shock you, right? But it ain't costing you a nickel to give him a look and then jettison him out if he's not up to task. The contract they gave Dwayne Smoot tells me he's the Bills' 4th defensive end. So
Pat, I'll be honest, I didn't even see what the numbers are.
It's $2.5 million, but like almost all of it's guaranteed. Like it's guaranteed. And they made like 4 void years to kind of lower the cap hit over the course. So it's not all this year. But that contract tells me he's making this football team. He's not getting a look like they signed Deion Jones and Chase Claypool that day. Those are give a look guys too. Yeah. This is your 4th defensive end. Little concerned about that. I feel like there's some guys out there that maybe I would have liked a little bit better. But again, it's just putting more on Von Miller now and Rizzo and AJ Epinesa. Anyway, all right, let's wrap up with our Finish the Sentence segment. This is something we often do, kind of get away from just sports talk, give people watching and listening a chance to know what Anthony's thinking, what I'm thinking, and maybe, again, you're hearing these questions. I'm sure you got your own responses to them as well. All right, ready?
Ready to go.
My favorite, and the first 2 of these are in honor of, even though now people are listening to this late Monday or early Tuesday, kind of in honor of Mother's Day. My favorite TV mom ever is blank.
Favorite TV mom ever, Marie Barone, played by Doris Roberts on Everybody Loves Raymond. Ray's mom, just, you think of that show, the popularity, that entire cast, just fantastic. I mean, obviously, like, the bit of that, passive aggressive mother and like, laying the guilt on to her sons and, sort of everything with her daughter-in-law and this and that. But when you just think about fantastic characters and TV, like, I mean, I remember watching that show, every week, or even when like in syndication, like each and every day. And she just would seem to steal every scene that she was in and played the role so well. Just a fantastic job of playing that character. So to me, that was the first one that popped to mind. Certainly some other great ones out there, but
sure.
You think of a show that I probably watched the most episodes of, that was it. And again, just Doris Roberts, fantastic as Marie Barone.
I'm going to be honest with you. That's a show that I never really got into, and I probably should. Maybe that'll be one of those shows at some point that I sit down and that I binge. I'm going to do something that I feel like I always do on this show, and that's age myself and kind of phase out probably a large portion of the audience. But I'm going to a really old show, a classic TV sitcom, and I'm going to go Edith Bunker from All in the Family. Wholesome, loud, funny, reminds me of so many moms that when I grew up in the 70s, 80s on the West Side, just like that, loud and funny. She really felt authentic, and she put up with Archie Bunker's bullshit all the time. And, you know, he would run his mouth, but when somebody had to put their foot down and let them know who's the boss, it was her. And again, I know most people are saying, who the hell is Edith Bunker? They're all in the family. It's a classic sitcom. Actually, for the time, a groundbreaking sitcom as well. So again, aging myself out like I always seem to do on this show. All right, next one. The best song with mom or a version of mom in the title is blank.
Yeah, there weren't too many options that came to mind, and maybe I'm just not as well versed in it. But I went with a song for Mama by Boys to Men.
Love that song.
Sentimental value, you know, that's the song at my wedding that I danced with my mother to, the father or the mother-son dance, and that was always holds kind of a special place. So that was an easy pick for me.
I'm going to I'm not going to pick that song, but I will tell you this. That was my song dancing with my mom at my wedding, which was back in 2001. Kind of a new song at that time. It was I think it came out like late 90s, like 97, 98, but that's not my pick. That's an awesome song. In fact, I probably like it more than this one, but I don't know why. Listen, dude, I'm not a big country fan, and I'm especially not a big traditional music country fan, but Mama Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys by Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson. If I hear that, even if I don't want to, if I don't like it, I can't help but sing along to it. When I hear it on the radio or at a party or wherever, a bar, something like that. It was the one that for me it just resonated the most. Pretty silly song, though. Not a good song.
Good choice, though. You know what I mean? Like that's one now to be in my head the rest of the day.
Yeah, it's probably one. I hate that too. And there's a song you don't even like, but you can't get it out of your head because it gets stuck. All right, last one. Kind of flip back here to football. So the NFL schedule, like I said, officially comes out Wednesday night. We may find out before, but who knows? We don't know now. But I want the Bills' week 1 game to be blank.
You know, and I said this earlier, so I'll kind of stick with it. I think someone had posed a question on Twitter. I said Detroit, right? Like high octane game, like just two great fan bases. I think that would be like one of the most anticipated games. I could see it being a Sunday night football or Monday night football, or even like the 4:30 time slot on Sunday that a national audience would really get behind in these two franchises looking to get to the Super Bowl this year. And it could be, a Super Bowl type of preview. That's like if I'm just going with my heart. If I'm going with my head, I mean, I should pick something like, I don't know, like play the Patriots week 1 before they've, or the rookie quarterback in his first game or something along those lines, like just to start the season 1-0. But I mean, let's be honest, week 1, I'd like some sort of a wow matchup, and Detroit's the one I keep coming back to.
I predicted we did a Bills like kind of bold prediction show yesterday, and I predicted week 1 would be at Houston Sunday Night Football. Got Stephon Diggs right off the bat. Tell you what, week 1 at Detroit on a Sunday night would be a juicy NFL matchup as well. But yeah, I said a game I want, and you just said it. I'll kind of piggyback off what Joe from Queens said yesterday. I'd love to start with a game against the Patriots on the road too, because I do think it is important. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of new elements to this football team right now. And I don't want to have a murderer's row of opponents right off the bat. Like, I'd like to see the Bills have some time to really adjust and get used to these new moving parts, these new players, new elements of this team. And all teams have the same, but it's not fun. It's not sexy, but give me a couple W's early on, because there's not a lot of easy W's, by the way, on the schedule. There's really not. I mean, I looked at it, and the opponents, there's a lot of good football. It's going to be a tough schedule for the Bills, but we'll talk about it in the future. So my pick's New England. Next week, the schedule will be out, so we can kind of react to it as well. All right, well, it's going to do it for this show. We want a good, solid hour here, man. Always appreciate you. Anthony Marino. Follow him on Twitter at Marino. Check him out later this week. I think it's coming out later this week. Lockdown Bills. That series drops this week, right? End of the week, I think.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what day, but we'll be retweeting it.
I'm sure we will. All right, for Anthony Marino, I'm Patrick Moran. Thank you. I'll be back. Brand new show tomorrow. Talk to you then.